I'll take everything from you," my husband announced across the courtroom with the confidence of a man who believed the gavel had already fallen in his favor. He had no idea I was carrying the only weapon capable of destroying a life built on lies, which was pure evidence. He never suspected that I held the very key he had been hunting for since the day we met. My name is Bryn Calloway. I am 32 years old, and until 5 minutes ago, I thought my biggest problem was finding the specific brand of organic oat milk my fiancé insisted on drinking. I sat in the driver's seat of my sedan, parked in the gray, drizzling afternoon of a St. Louis supermarket lot. The engine was off. The rain drummed a rhythmic beat against the roof, enclosing me in a small steel box of isolation. In my hand, I clutched a grocery list written on thick cardstock. It was a list of performative health foods that Dylan Rourke loved to photograph and post online to curate his image of the perfect modern partner. My phone screen lit up on the passenger seat. It was a notification from Dylan. He had sent a voice memo. I smiled instinctively. Usually, these were sweet nothings or last-minute reminders to pick up dry cleaning. I pressed play, expecting his charming baritone to ask about dinner. Static hissed through the car speakers. He must have pocket-dialed me, or perhaps he set the phone down without locking the screen. I reached out to stop it, but then I heard a voice that made my hand freeze in mid-air. It was Tessa, his sister. Sure she isn't going to read the fine print, Tessa's voice was sharp, cutting through the background noise of what sounded like a restaurant. Bryn Dillon's voice replied, sounding bored and dismissive. No, she is malleable. I just have to look her in the eyes and say, "It is for our future," and she will sign whatever I put in front of her. I felt the blood drain from my face. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. Just make sure she does not actually read the power of attorney. Tessa snapped. If she sees the scope of the authority you are asking for, even an idiot would pause. She won't. Dylan laughed. It was a sound I used to love, a sound that used to make me feel safe. Now it sounded like a jagged edge scraping against bone. Bryn is a rescue dog. Tessa. She has no family. She has no backup. She is so grateful just to be allowed in the house that she won't dare bark at the master. Tessa let out a cold, short laugh. Fine. Get it done. We are on a schedule. Relax, Dylan said, his voice dripping with arrogance. I am not marrying a wife. Tess, I am buying a signature. The recording ended abruptly. Silence rushed back into the car, heavier than before. I did not cry. Tears felt like a luxury for a woman who was loved, and I clearly was not that woman. I work in compliance for a living. My job is to find cracks in systems, to locate where the rules are broken. My brain bypassed the heartbreak and went straight to analysis. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of the vanilla car air freshener that suddenly smelled cloying and fake. My mind began to race, connecting dots I had previously ignored. The rushed proposal, the way he handled all the finances but never let me see the accounts, the way Tessa always hovered during our dinner dates. I had thought it was a close sibling bond. It was actually a two-person wolf pack circling a lamb. My phone buzzed again, shattering the silence. A text message from Dylan flashed on the screen. Babe, going into a meeting for 2 hours. Love you. The contrast between the monster on the recording and the loving fiancé in the text message made my stomach turn. Love you was not a sentiment. It was an anesthetic. It was a dose of chloroform meant to keep me asleep while they dissected my life. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. If I confronted him now, he would spin a story. He would gaslight me. He would delete the evidence. They thought I was a rescue dog. They thought I was weak because I was alone. I decided then and there that I would not run. I would not let them change their plan. I needed to see exactly where the trap was laid so I could ensure they were the ones who stepped into it. I wiped a single bead of cold sweat from my forehead. I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. My eyes looked different. The softness was gone. Okay, I whispered to the empty car. I'll play dumb until you get sloppy. I unlocked the door to the apartment Dylan and I shared. It was a sprawling penthouse in the Central West End, styled with so much beige and chrome that it felt less like a home and more like a waiting room for a very expensive dentist. Everything had its place. The throw pillows were chopped down the middle. The counters were gleaming. I stood in the foyer and realized that to Dylan, I was just another piece of furniture. I was an accessory chosen to complement the aesthetic, not a partner to share the life. I did not take off my shoes. I walked straight to my laptop and opened a private browsing window. My compliance training kicked in like a survival instinct. I created a new email account with a random 20-character password that I did not write down. I uploaded the voice memo to the cloud drive associated with the account, filing it under my maiden name. Then I made 3 backups on 3 separate encrypted servers. I opened a blank document and began to transcribe. I listened to the recording at half speed. I typed every word Dylan said. I typed every cruel laugh Tessa uttered. It was masochistic, but necessary. I needed to turn my heartbreak into data. I needed to transform their insults into exhibits for a courtroom. By the time I finished, rescue dog was no longer an insult that made me cry. It was line 4 on the transcript. I closed the laptop and walked into Dylan's home office. He was usually meticulous, but arrogance makes people sloppy. The laser printer in the corner had a blinking orange light. A paper jam. I crouched down and opened the tray. The paper was crinkled, stuck halfway through the feed. I gently pulled it out, smoothing the warm sheet against my thigh. It was an email printout from Tessa. The subject line read, Phase 2 Logistics. My eyes scanned the bullet points. Open joint checking. Create vendor profile. Update beneficiary status. Then, my finger stopped on a line that made the air in the room feel 10 degrees colder. Document lock plus notary plus blanket authorization. Execute 48 hours post-ceremony. They had a timeline. They were not just going to manipulate me. They were going to legally erase me 2 days after I said, I do. I folded the paper and shoved it deep into the hidden pocket of my purse. I needed to maintain the illusion. I pulled out my phone and typed a message to Dylan. Babe, just finalizing the menu. Do you think the filet mignon is too heavy for a summer reception? I hit send. I was feeding the beast to keep it calm. The next morning at Harborline Compliance Bureau, I arrived an hour early. My office was a sanctuary of dual monitors and forensic software. I logged into the bank portal for the joint account Dylan insisted we open for wedding expenses. He thought he was being transparent by giving me access, but he underestimated what I look for when I look at numbers. I downloaded the raw transaction history and ran it through a pivot table. I filtered out the florists and the caterers. One pattern stood out immediately. Every Friday, there was a transfer of exactly $4,000 to a recipient listed as Juniper Advisory Solutions. It sounded legitimate. It sounded boring. That was the point. I ran a quick search on the business registry. Juniper Advisory Solutions was registered only 3 months ago. The address was a post office box in a strip mall 3 towns over. I sat back in my ergonomic chair and stared at the screen. This was not about protecting Dylan's assets from a gold digger. This was active siphoning. They were building a pipeline to drain our marital funds into a shell company before I even realized the money was gone. You are not saving for our future, I whispered to the screen. You are robbing me in real time. The trap was not just emotional. It was financial. And the plumbing was already installed. Renee Salazar's office was not what I expected. It was tucked away in a nondescript limestone building in Clayton, and the interior was as sterile and organized as a surgical theater. There were no mahogany bookshelves filled with unread encyclopedias or plush leather chairs designed to comfort weeping clients. There was a glass desk that looked like a sheet of ice, 2 stiff ergonomic chairs, and a silence so profound it felt heavy. Renee, a woman in her late 40s with silver-streaked hair cut sharp enough to draw blood, sat across from me. She had been reading my transcript, the printout of the email from Tessa, and the transaction logs for 20 minutes without saying a single word. She turned the pages with a precise, rhythmic snap that sounded like a metronome. Finally. She took off her reading glasses and set them on the glass surface. This is not just a prenup dispute. Bryn, Renee said, her voice low and even, devoid of any comforting warmth. This is a distress scenario. A distress scenario, I asked, leaning forward. They are not just trying to protect his assets, she explained, tapping a manicured finger on the printout of the Juniper advisory transfer. They are setting up a corporate structure where you assume the liability for the debt they are about to incur, while the actual capital is siphoned out to an entity they control. They want to use your credit score as a fresh battery for their dying machine. Once they drain you, they will discard the husk. I felt a wave of nausea rise in my throat, but I swallowed it down. The reality was worse than I had imagined, so I should leave. I should pack my bags tonight, block his number, and disappear. Renee shook her head slowly. If you run now, they win. They will keep the deposit you put down on the venue. They will keep the funds you already transferred to the joint account. They will scrub the Juniper entity, claim it was a clerical error, and move on to a new target who is less observant than you. Do you want that no? I said firmly, my hands clenching into fists on my lap. I want them to pay. Then we have to let them think they have already won, Renee said. She leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. Did he ever have access to your social security card, your birth certificate, your passport? Yes, I admitted, feeling a flush of shame heat my cheeks. When we applied for the marriage license, he held onto the folder for a few days because he said he wanted to keep everything organized. Then assume there are already lines of credit opened in your name that you do not know about, Renee stated bluntly. We need to dig deeper. I am bringing in a specialist. His name is Miles Ketter. He is a forensic accountant who can trace digital footprints better than the FBI. He will find where the money is really going and who is actually spending it. She pushed the papers back toward me across the glass desk. For now, you have to go back there and be exactly who they think you are. You need to feed the predator. If you starve them, they get cautious. If you feed them, they get sloppy. I understood. I left her office and sat in my car for a moment, watching the traffic on the highway, steeling my nerves. I needed to test the waters. I needed to see just how hungry they were. I opened my text thread with Dylan. I typed out a message, carefully crafting the tone of a woman who was overwhelmed, submissive, and completely blind to the knife at her throat. Babe, I was thinking, after the wedding, can we just merge all our savings? I really hate dealing with separate statements and all that legal stuff. I would rather you just handle it all. I hit send. I watched the screen, my breath catching in my chest. 1 minute passed, then 2. I expected him to wait, to play it cool, to pretend he needed to think about it. But the 3 typing dots appeared almost instantly. That makes sense. His reply read, popping up in a gray bubble. Tessa will prepare the papers so it is ready for you to sign. Less stress for you. I stared at the phone. The speed of his response was not born of efficiency. It was born of desperation. He did not even pretend to consult her. He knew the plan because the plan was the only thing that mattered to them. You are starving, I whispered to the phone, and you just bit the hook. The steam room at the luxury spa in Clayton was designed to be relaxing, but with Tessa sitting across from me, it felt more like an interrogation cell filled with eucalyptus fog. The heat was oppressive, pressing against my chest and making every breath heavy. Tessa was wrapped in a white towel that looked expensive enough to pay my rent for a month. She wiped a bead of sweat from her collarbone and gave me a smile that did not quite reach her eyes. It is so good to finally get some bonding time. Bryn, Tessa said, her voice echoing slightly against the cedar walls. Dylan worries about you, you know, with your parents gone. It must be hard managing everything alone. I shifted on the wooden bench, letting my shoulders slump to mimic exhaustion. It is, I said, keeping my voice small. I mean, I try not to think about it. But there are things to think about. Tessa pressed. shifting closer through the steam. The estate, the paperwork, who handles all of that for you? This was the hook. She was measuring the size of the catch. There is some trust thing, I said, waving my hand dismissively as if the topic bored me. A distribution clause or something. Honestly, I hate all that legal jargon. I just get these envelopes and I put them in a drawer. I just want, I do not know, someone to handle it. Tessa's eyes lit up. I could practically see the calculator running behind her pupils. You know, she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. You should not have to worry about that. Once you and Dylan are married, we can set up a blanket authorization. It is just a standard form. It would let Dylan and me, if he is busy, handle the boring stuff for you. You would not even have to look at another legal document. Really? I asked, widening my eyes. That sounds amazing. You would do that? Of course, Tessa said, reaching out to pat my sweaty knee. We are family. I can even bring a notary to the house so you do not have to go to a bank. It is such a small thing. You're the best. Tessa, I said, forcing a smile that made my jaw ache. I am so lucky. By the time I got back to the apartment, my skin was scrubbed raw, but my mind was sharper than ever. The apartment was empty. Dylan was still at the gym. I walked into the kitchen and saw his iPad lying on the marble island. He had left it unlocked. My heart rate spiked. I knew I had less than 5 minutes. I tapped the calendar icon. The screen filled with his schedule. Most of it was mundane gym, meetings, dinner reservations. But then I scrolled to the week of the wedding. There, 2 days after the date, was a block of time color-coded in red. It had been added by Tessa. The title read, Doc Lock in Notary, Transfer Prep. I tapped on the event to see the details. The notes section contained a single line that made the blood freeze in my veins. Leverage strictly applied. They were not planning a honeymoon. They were planning a hostile takeover. Leverage meant me. I was the leverage they needed to pry open whatever vault they thought I was hiding. The sound of the front door unlocking snapped me back to reality. I quickly swiped the app closed, locked the screen, and set the iPad back exactly where it had been, aligning the edge with the grout line on the counter. I rushed to the sofa and threw myself down, pulling a throw blanket over my legs just as Dylan walked into the room. He tossed his gym bag on the floor and looked at me. I kept my eyes closed, breathing in a slow, deep rhythm, pretending to be asleep. I heard his heavy footsteps approach. He stopped right beside the sofa. I could smell his cologne mixed with sweat. Almost there, he whispered. The words hung in the air, chilling and predatory. He did not touch me. He did not kiss my forehead. He just stood there, looking at his acquisition. To him, I was not a person. I was a door. And he had just scheduled the day he was going to kick it down. I have lived my life in beige tones and clearance racks for a very specific reason. It was not because I lacked funds. It was because my father, a man who built an empire out of shipping containers and silence, drilled a single mantra into my head before he died. He used to say, "Privacy is survival." Bryn. If they do not know what you have, they cannot take it. So, I let the world see a compliance officer with a mid-range salary and a sensible wardrobe. I let Dylan believe he was the provider. The truth was a cold, hard ledger locked in a vault in Delaware. I was the sole anonymous successor trustee of the Callaway Meridian Trust. I did not just have a savings account. I controlled a sprawling network of logistics hubs and commercial real estate across the Midwest, all buried under layers of nondescript limited liability companies. I was not a rescue dog. I was the bank. I needed to know how he found me. I waited until Dylan was at work, and then I went down to our storage unit in the basement of the building. He kept his old work files there, boxes from his time as a junior analyst at a consulting firm. I sliced through the packing tape of a box marked Due Diligence 2019. I flipped through binder after binder until I found it. It was a valuation report for a supply chain acquisition. And there, on page 42, in a list of beneficial owners that should have been redacted, was my name, Bryn L. Calloway. The name was highlighted in yellow. I stared at the neon ink. The coffee shop meeting, the accidental spill on my shirt, the way he pursued me with such intensity. It was never romance. It was research. He had seen my name on a ledger, realized I was the quiet key to a fortune, and tracked me down to my gym. He had hunted me like big game. I took the binder to Renee's office an hour later. She flipped through the pages, her expression shifting from professional concern to alarm. "This changes the landscape entirely," Renee said, tapping the highlighted name. "He is not just trying to steal your liquid cash, Bryn. That is petty theft. This is a corporate raid. He wants the power of attorney so he can leverage the trust assets. He wants to use your signature to take out massive loans against the real estate holdings." "Steal authority," I said, the words tasting like copper. "He wants to indebt the trust to fund himself." "Exactly," Renee said. "And once the debt is secured, he will vanish, and you will be left with the creditors." Miles Ketter, the forensic accountant, walked in then, holding a tablet. He looked tired. I found the link. Miles said without preamble, "Juniper Advisory Solutions." The IP address used to register the domain resolves to a residential gateway, specifically the guest house behind Tessa's property. And there is more. I found a pattern of consulting fees being drained from 3 of Dylan's elderly clients over the last year. Small amounts, $2,000 here, $3,000 there. They are practicing on them. But you are the retirement plan. I looked at the map of their greed. It was expansive and cruel. If I broke off the engagement now, they would walk away. They would claim it was a bad breakup. They would keep the money they had already skimmed from others. They would find another victim. I do not want them to walk away, I said, my voice steady. I want them to go to prison. Renee looked at me. Then you have to let them do it. You have to let them attempt the theft. We need the paper trail to be absolute. We need them to commit fraud on the record. I nodded slowly. I thought about the wedding dress hanging in my closet. It was no longer a symbol of love. It was a costume for a sting operation. I am not canceling the wedding. I told them, I am going to turn that ceremony into a holding cell. Renee raised an eyebrow. Are you sure you can go through with saying the vows knowing what you know? I stood up, smoothing the front of my skirt. If he wants my signature, I'll let him chase it right into a trap. I chose a Tuesday evening to drop the bomb. We were eating takeout on the floor because Dylan said it was romantic, though I knew he was just being cheap again. I pulled a crumpled piece of paper out of my pocket, a forgery I had printed on aged paper stock. "Dylan," I said, making my voice tremble just enough to sound overwhelmed. "I found this letter in my dad's old things. I think there is a trust distribution due when I get married. It says something about $2.8 million. I looked up at him with wide, panicked eyes. But the tax language is so scary. I am afraid the IRS is going to take half of it if I do it wrong." The transformation was instantaneous and terrifying. The boredom vanished from Dylan's face, replaced by a hunger so raw it looked like lust. He choked on his water. $2.8 million, he asked, his voice cracking. "Yes," I whimpered. I do not know what to do. Within an hour, he had ordered 3 dozen roses to be delivered to my office the next day. He held my hand. He stroked my hair. He looked at me like I was a winning lottery ticket he had just found on the sidewalk. "Babe, listen to me," he said, his eyes gleaming. "You do not have to worry. We can sign a unity agreement before the wedding. It minimizes tax exposure and streamlines management. Tessa can draft it tonight. She is a wizard with this stuff." "Oh, thank God," I exhaled, letting my shoulders slump. "You would do that. Anything for our future," he said. The next morning, I met Renee in the back of a coffee shop. She slid a single sheet of paper across the table. It looked exactly like the signature page of the document Tessa had emailed over at 3 in the morning, right down to the font and the spacing. "This is the decoy," Renee explained. "To the naked eye. It is identical. But read the fine print under the signature line." I squinted. In microscopic text, it read, "Affidavit of duress." Signatory acknowledges this instrument was presented under fraudulent pretenses and hereby invalidates all prior permissions. "Swap it in," Renee said. And we have him. That night, I needed them to say the quiet part out loud. I went into the master bathroom and turned the shower on full blast. I left my phone on the hallway console table, hidden behind a vase, with the voice recorder running. Then I went back into the bathroom and sat on the closed toilet lid for 20 minutes, staring at the tile. When I listened to the playback later, the audio was crystal clear. "She is ready to sign." Dylan's voice said, "She is terrified of the taxes." "Good," Tessa replied. "Once she signs, we move the funds to Juniper within 24 hours. We strip the trust clean. What if she notices she won't?" Tessa scoffed. "And even if she does, by the time she lawyers up, it is gone. It will be in the Caymans. I saved the file." It was the nail in their coffin, but I wanted one more layer of insurance. I suggested we throw a massive engagement gala. I told Dylan I wanted to celebrate our luck. He agreed immediately, eager to show off his sudden rise in status. We held it on a rooftop in downtown St. Louis. The city lights glittered below us, oblivious to the crime in progress. I wore a white dress that Dylan picked out. It was tight and uncomfortable. Miles Ketter was there, posing as a friend of a friend, dressed in a sharp gray suit. He cornered Tessa near the bar. I watched from a distance as he played the role of notary protocol guy. "Complex structures are a headache," Miles said, loud enough for me to hear as I passed by. "I usually root through a single LLC to save time, but the liability is a nightmare." Tessa, unable to resist correcting someone, took the bait. "That is amateur hour," she said, swirling her martini. "You have to layer it. Domestic shell to offshore vendor. That is how you break the tracing chain." Miles nodded, looking impressed, while the recorder in his pocket soaked up her professional admission of money laundering techniques. I turned away, satisfied, but then I froze. Standing near the edge of the terrace was a man I did not know. He was older, wearing a suit that cost more than my car. On his lapel was a small, silver pin in the shape of a compass. He was not drinking. He was just watching me. He caught my eye and raised his glass in a mock toast. A chill went down my spine that had nothing to do with the wind. Dylan walked up to the man, his posture submissive, nodding rapidly as the man whispered something to him. I realized then that Dylan was not the top of the food chain. He had borrowed money or promised results to someone dangerous to fund his lifestyle while waiting for my payout. The man with the compass pin was the creditor, and I was the collateral. "I hope you brought your checkbook," I thought, sipping my sparkling water. "Because the bank is closed." I smiled at Dylan as he walked back to me, sweating slightly. The timer was ticking down, and they had no idea the bomb was under their own chairs. The air on the rooftop was thin and smelled of expensive perfume and desperation. Tessa found me near the railing where I was pretending to admire the view of the St. Louis skyline. She looked me up and down, her gaze lingering on my waistline with a predatory smirk. "You are so brave for your figure, Bryn," Tessa said, her voice dripping with faux sweetness. "Most women would not dare wear white satin with those hips. But I love how uncomplicated you are. You just wear what you like, regardless of how it looks." I took a sip of my champagne, letting the bubbles burn my throat. "Oh, thank you, Tessa. I just wear what Dylan picks out. He has such great taste." I raised my voice slightly, ensuring the group of investors standing nearby could hear me over the jazz band. "Dylan told me men like wives who listen and sign where they are told." Tessa froze. Her glass halted halfway to her mouth. For a split second, the mask slipped, and I saw pure panic in her eyes. She looked around quickly to see if anyone had caught the implication of coercion, but the investors were just chuckling, nodding as if I were making a charmingly old-fashioned joke. "He is such a traditionalist," I added with a giggle, twisting the knife. "Actually, I was thinking, since it is so much money, maybe I should have a lawyer just glance at those papers, just a quick peek." The reaction was immediate and violent. Dylan appeared at my elbow instantly, his grip on my arm tight enough to bruise. Tessa stepped closer, boxing me in. "No," Dylan said, his voice too loud, too sharp. He forced a laugh, but his eyes were frantic. "Babe, lawyers will just drag it out and charge us thousands for nothing. We are on a deadline for the tax window." "You trust me, right? We do not need strangers involved in family business," Tessa hissed, her smile now a rictus of tension. Okay, I said, retreating into my shell. "I trust you. I just get nervous." They relaxed, but the damage was done. I had seen the cracks. They were terrified. Across the roof, the man with the compass pin was watching. He did not smile. He walked over to Dylan, bypassing me entirely. He leaned in and whispered something into Dylan's ear. I saw the color drain from my fiancé's face. Dylan nodded rapidly, looking like a child being scolded by a principal. The pressure was real. Dylan had to deliver me, or the compass man would collect something else. I slipped my phone out of my clutch and tapped a message to Renee. "We have audience plus panic plus confession." A moment later, a secure message came back from Miles, confirmed. Several large transfers from the elderly clients to Juniper were flagged as consulting fees, but the invoices are ghosts. No services rendered. This is wire fraud. Keep going. The gala ended, and we drove home in silence. When we walked through the door of the apartment, Dylan pulled me into a hug. It was suffocating. He buried his face in my neck, but there was no affection in it. He was checking for a pulse. He was checking to see if his asset was still viable. "Good girl," he whispered against my skin. "You were so good tonight." The words made my skin crawl. It took every ounce of my willpower not to shove him away and scream. Instead, I went limp, playing the part of the obedient doll one last time. Tessa set the meeting. Dylan said, pulling back. "Thursday morning, right before we head to the airport for the honeymoon. We sign, we notarize, and then we are free." "Thursday," I repeated. "Okay." Later that night, while Dylan slept the heavy sleep of the arrogant, I stood in front of the mirror in the guest bathroom. I had the decoy signature page in my pocket. I practiced the motion. I reached into my pocket, palmed the paper, and slid it over the imaginary document on the counter. I did it again, and again. Reach, palm, slide, align. I did it until my hand moved faster than my eye could follow. I did it until it was not a trick, but a reflex. Thursday was coming. They were bringing the pen. I was bringing the pain. The conference room in the downtown co-working space was a box of glass and anxiety. It was designed for transparency. Yet we were there to commit a crime. Dylan paced the length of the room, his shoes squeaking against the polished concrete floor. He looked like a caged tiger, agitated and hungry. Tessa sat at the head of the table, motionless. She had the 30-page document spread out before her, her fingers resting on the edges like a surgeon waiting for a scalpel. I sat in the middle, making myself look small. Next to me sat Leo, a paralegal from Renee's office. He was 23, wearing an ill-fitting suit and thick glasses. We had chosen him specifically because he looked incompetent. Dylan had barely glanced at him, dismissing him as a silent witness required by the notary protocol. Utterly unworthy of suspicion. Tessa slid the document toward me. It was heavy. "This is everything we discussed," Tessa said, her voice smooth and devoid of warmth. "The unity agreement. It just consolidates the accounts so Dylan can manage the tax liabilities while you are on the honeymoon." Dylan stopped pacing and came to stand behind my chair. He placed his hands on my shoulders, his thumbs digging into my muscles. It was meant to be comforting, but it felt like a restraint. "Babe," he said softly, leaning down so his breath hit my ear. "You know how you get with numbers. You get overwhelmed. Remember when you cried over that tax form last year? I just want to take that burden off you. Let me carry the weight." I looked up at him, widening my eyes to simulate the panic he expected to see. "I know," I whispered. 18 months is 18 months of power of attorney. Standard Tessa didn't even blink. It covers 2 tax cycles. Being a silent partner is best. Bryn, you enjoy the lifestyle. We handle the headache." I looked at the paper. The signature line was on the final page, waiting for me. This was the moment. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic rhythm that threatened to give me away. But my hands remained steady. I had practiced this. "Okay," I said, my voice trembling. "I just want everything to be right." I reached for my purse, which sat open on the table. "I need a tissue." I sniffed, letting a tear leak out of my eye. It was a performance worthy of an Academy Award. As I pulled the tissue out with my left hand, my right hand moved with the speed of a magician. I palmed the decoy page, the affidavit of duress that was folded flat against the back of my phone. In one fluid motion, under the cover of wiping my nose, I slid the decoy page onto the stack and palmed the real signature page into my sleeve. It took less than a second. Dylan was looking at his watch. Tessa was looking at the pen. Neither of them was looking at my hands. "I am sorry," I said, blowing my nose. "I am just emotional." "It is okay," Dylan said, his patience thinning. "Just sign it, and we can go." I picked up the pen. I signed my name on the decoy page, right above the microscopic text that would hang them both. The ink flowed black and permanent. I pushed the stack back to Tessa. The room went silent. Tessa picked up the document. My breath stopped. If she read the fine print, if she noticed the paper grain was slightly different, it was over. She flipped to the back page. She looked at the signature. She smiled. She did not read a single word of the text above it. She shoved the document into her leather briefcase like it was a winning lottery ticket. "Done," Tessa said, snapping the locks shut. Dylan let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for weeks. He kissed the top of my head. "I'm proud of you, Bryn. You did the right thing for us." I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. I felt branded. He was proud of his acquisition. He was proud that the rescue dog had finally learned to sit and stay. We walked out of the glass box. Leo, the paralegal, walked a few paces behind us. As we reached the elevator, he adjusted his glasses and murmured, barely moving his lips, "Scan confirmed. Uploading to secure server now." They had not seen a thing. I went home alone, claiming I needed to rest before the big day. I walked into the bedroom and looked at the wedding dress hanging on the door. It was a ghost in white satin. "Tomorrow," I said to the empty room. "Tomorrow I might still wear the dress, but not to belong to anyone." I stood before the judge in the sterile, fluorescent-lit room of City Hall and said the words "I do" with the solemnity of a woman reading a Miranda warning. I did not sign the marriage license because I wanted to be Dylan's wife. I signed it because I needed to lock him into this jurisdiction and bind him legally to the fraud he was about to commit. As the ink dried, I saw Dylan exchange a look with Tessa, who was standing as our witness. It was not a look of celebration. It was the look of 2 thieves who had just successfully disabled the alarm system. We had barely left the building when the notification started lighting up the server Miles was monitoring. They did not even wait for the reception. Tessa activated the power of attorney document immediately, attempting to push a transfer of $2.8 million from the trust account I had revealed to them. I clutched my stomach as we reached the car. "Dylan, I feel terrible," I groaned, leaning against the doorframe. "I think the champagne at brunch was off. I need to go home and lie down." Dylan looked annoyed. His schedule was tight. He wanted to get to the airport for the honeymoon, where he could isolate me while the money moved. But before he could argue, his phone rang. It was the managing partner at Sable Ridge Wealth Partners. I watched the color drain from his face. In audit, Dylan stammered into the phone. Now, but I am on my way to my honeymoon. He listened for another moment, his eyes darting to Tessa. Okay, I am coming in. He hung up and turned to me, frantic. Babe, there is an emergency at the firm. A compliance issue. I have to go in for an hour. Tessa will take you home. No. Tessa cut in sharply. I am coming with you. If it is compliance, you need a witness. She was terrified he would crack under pressure. Go, I said weakly. I will just take a cab and sleep it off. As they sped away, I dropped the act. I hailed a cab, but I did not go home. I went to my office at Harborline and changed out of my white dress. I put on my charcoal suit, the one I wore when I had to fire people. I pulled my hair back into a tight bun. The rescue dog was gone. The trustee was here. By the time I arrived at Sable Ridge Wealth Partners, the storm had already made landfall. Renee had timed the filings perfectly. The moment the wire transfer to Juniper hit the banking network, it triggered the emergency freeze order she had prepared. Simultaneously, she filed a protective order and a formal complaint with the state financial regulatory body regarding the exploitation of Dylan's elderly clients. I walked past the receptionist who tried to stop me. I knew exactly where to go. The main conference room was a scene of carnage. Dylan and Tessa were sitting on one side of the long mahogany table, looking pale and sweaty. Across from them sat the managing partners of Sable Ridge, and in the center sat the man with the compass pin, the representative from Crestline Harbor Holdings. This acquisition is contingent on clean books, the man with the compass pin was saying, his voice level and dangerous. And we found a tumor. A shell company called Juniper Advisory Solutions. It is siphoning client funds, and today, it attempted a massive unauthorized pull from a private trust. That is a misunderstanding, Dylan shouted, his voice cracking. My wife! She authorized it. I have her signature. The signature is flagged as distressed, the man replied calmly. And the transaction has frozen our merger. We cannot proceed without final signatory clearance from the primary holder of the Callaway Meridian Trust to verify the legitimacy of these movements. Dylan looked around the room, wild-eyed. Who is that? Just get them on the phone. I will explain it. The heavy oak doors swung open. I stepped inside. The room fell silent. Dylan looked at me, confused. He expected a sick, compliant wife in a sundress. Instead, he saw a woman in a tailored suit, holding a leather portfolio, radiating authority. Bryn, he asked, his voice trembling. What are you doing here? You should be resting. I ignored him. I walked to the head of the table. The man with the compass pin stood up and offered me his chair. I took it. Gentlemen, I said, my voice steady and cold. I am the authorized representative and sole beneficiary of the Callaway Meridian Trust, and I am afraid we have a significant compliance failure to discuss. Tessa gasped, a sound like a balloon popping. Dylan stared at me, his mouth opening and closing, unable to process the shift in reality. He looked at the man with the compass pin, then back at me, and finally, the horrific realization dawned on him. You, Dylan whispered, clutching the edge of the table. You are the client, no, Dylan, I said, looking him dead in the eye. I am the owner, and you just tried to rob the bank while the manager was watching. The emergency hearing was a spectacle of arrogance colliding with reality. Dylan stood before the judge, his suit perfectly pressed, his demeanor that of a wronged husband dealing with a hysterical wife. He pointed a finger at me, his voice echoing off the wood paneling. I'll take everything from you, he hissed, low enough that only I could hear before turning his charm back to the bench. Your Honor, my wife is hiding significant assets. She trapped me into this marriage to humiliate me. I am requesting full financial control to protect the marital estate and in order for her to surrender the trust documents immediately. He thought he was winning. He thought his confidence was evidence. Renee Salazar stood up. She did not raise her voice. She simply raised a timeline. Your Honor, Renee said, placing a flash drive on the bench. We do not dispute that Mr. Rourke seeks control. In fact, we have him stating it quite clearly. She played the voice memo from the car. Dylan's voice filled the courtroom, calling me a rescue dog, laughing about buying a signature. The judge's eyebrows lifted. Dylan stiffened. Renee did not stop. She introduced the email about Phase 2. She presented the calendar screenshot marked Dock Lock. She played the recording from the shower, where Tessa explicitly discussed moving the funds to the Caymans within 24 hours. This was not a marriage, Your Honor, Renee said. This was a heist. Dylan was sweating now, but he played his last card. I have a signed power of attorney, he shouted, losing his composure. She signed it. It is legal and binding. Renee handed the original document to the judge. Please read the text directly above the signature line. Your Honor. The judge adjusted his glasses. The room was silent. The signatory, acknowledge this instrument was presented under fraudulent pretenses and hereby invalidate all prior permissions. The judge read aloud. He looked up at Dylan. This is an affidavit of duress. Mr. Rourke, you submitted a confession as your primary evidence. Tessa, sitting in the gallery, covered her mouth. She knew it was over. Miles stepped forward next. We have also tracked the metadata, he stated. The attempts to access the trust accounts originated from devices registered to Ms. Tessa Rourke. Furthermore, we have linked the entity known as Juniper Advisory Solutions to ghost invoices sent to elderly clients of Sable Ridge Wealth Partners. The representative from Crestline Harbor stood up from the back. Your Honor, in light of these revelations, the acquisition of Sable Ridge is suspended. We are terminating Mr. Rourke's employment effective immediately for cause and are cooperating fully with the state prosecutor regarding the wire fraud charges. Dylan looked like he had been shot. His career, his reputation, his future. It all evaporated in 60 seconds. He turned to me, his eyes wide and wet, trying one last desperate manipulation. Bryn, please, he choked out. I loved you. Doesn't that matter? We can fix this. Don't destroy us out of spite. I stood up. I looked at the man who had called me a dog. I looked at the man who had planned to leave me bankrupt. You loved me, or you loved my signature, I asked. He had no answer. The gavel came down like a thunderclap. The judge granted an immediate annulment on the grounds of fraud. He issued a permanent restraining order. He froze all assets related to Juniper and ordered the transcripts turned over to the district attorney. It was a nightmare for them. Dylan was stripped of his license before he left the building. Tessa was served with a summons for conspiracy as she tried to sneak out the side door. The phrase "take everything" had returned to them like a boomerang, shattering their lives while leaving mine intact. I walked out of the courthouse into the bright afternoon sun. I took off the simple gold band I had worn for less than 48 hours. I did not throw it away. I dropped it into an evidence envelope Renee was holding. I walked to my car, my sensible mid-range sedan. I sat in the driver's seat and turned on the air conditioning. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with air that finally felt mine. I put the car in gear and merged into traffic. I did not know where I was going for dinner, and for the first time in 2 years, I did not have to ask for permission to decide. Thank you so much for listening to this story. Please let me know in the comments down below where you are tuning in from so we can share our thoughts and connect with each other. Do not forget to subscribe to the Victoria Revenge Stories channel, like the video, and support us by pressing the hype button so this story can be heard by even more people.